My nipples aren't close enough together. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Big Podcast. This is the second iteration of the Big Podcast, and we are here at the Kentucky Center for the Performing Arts on the weekend of the Bourbon Classic. I want to let everyone who's with us introduce ourselves today, so I'll start with myself. I'm Bill Straub. I'm one of the founders and the editor of ModernThirst.com.
Matt Gates here with Modern Thirst as well, another founder. Bill does all the good writing and reviewing for our site.
Wes Shelley from Modern Thirst. I'm the World Whiskeys writer.
And I'm Patrick Garrett, our Pops from Bourbon Banter.
Good old boy Mike from Sips, Suds, and Smokes.
And I am Jenny Tonic from the Charlie Tonic Hour.
I'm Carrie Ann Fuller. I'm straight up 615.
Dan Gardner, Four Roses Distillery.
Well, we want to thank everybody for listening to us today. We've had a fun weekend so far, but we want to give some thanks to Dan Gardner of Four Roses, who's here with us today. He's been a member of the quote-unquote Bus Club for several years, and he's been a great supporter of ours and all of our different sites and endeavors that we've done. So thank you very much, Dan. Also, awesome. I want to thank Mike, good old boy Mike, for doing all of the technical setup on this and bringing the entire rig, because this is not a small feat. So thanks, Mike.
You're welcome. Why is there Malort in my glass?
We were really hoping you wouldn't notice.
Hashtag Malort.
So you're saying all the chug rules that I talked about in advance, this is my retribution? Is that how this works?
Oh, my Lord.
So for those of you who haven't heard us in a while, the Big Podcast is kind of a collection of a lot of different people who have a lot of different kinds of social media presences and different bourbon preferences. Not preferences. Social media outlets. We have been drinking.
Good morning.
This started 3 years ago at the Bourbon Classic, really. A number of us, and the group who's involved has changed over the years, but a number of us were on one of the official media tours of the Bourbon Classic. So we went around for, I think that was almost a week long that first time. We went around to all sorts of different distilleries and bourbon outlets, and we really formed some good bonds, and it was very fun. It was a great weekend. And we just kind of decided over the years to keep it up. So that first year we recorded a big podcast. And
nobody was arrested. Nobody was indicted.
That we know of.
I'm going to stick with that.
That we know of. But some people have not been able to make it back since then. Some people, we do have some returnees, and it's the overall cast has changed. But that first year we met here at the Center for the Arts. We're up on one of the balconies or whatever you call it, the second level of the Center for the Arts here in Louisville. And we recorded a podcast, and we just kind of recapped everything we did. You can probably find that on everyone's different podcast outlets. You can find it on Modern Thirst as well.
Very much so.
But it was a great time, and it was very well liked by our listeners, meager as they may be compared to a lot of other folks on here. But we've kind of continued that. So every year, some of the same group, when we add people and some people fall off due to different commitments, we get back together for the same weekend every year, and we organize our own different bus trips or whatever you want to call it. Bus. And we visit different distilleries, and we visited Cooperages, anything related to bourbon that we think is fun, interesting, and exciting. And we just try to have a pretty good time with it. And then we all just have kind of become friends, and we hang out at the Bourbon Classic. So that is the Big Podcast. Anyone else have anything that I missed on that needs to be added?
My favorite color is Fernet.
His favorite drink is Malort.
When we're all 95 and we're sitting
green.
here at Bourbon Classic.
It could happen.
Why?
Maybe the bus club would be like a
The
Greyhound by
OG
then.
bus club.
Why is Carrie Ann wearing her sunglasses on the podcast?
Matt said he might put something on Facebook Live.
Is
so.
I had a technical difficulty there. So.
Okay.
Why is Matt not wearing pants? Why do you care about the sunglasses?
There you go.
That is a recurring theme.
That was Darren's thing
pants,
last
yes.
year. Yeah, Darren's had no pants.
So for the week to date, we have a lot of people here who've kind of been together since roughly Wednesday night, and some people who have joined us today or yesterday. So kind of generally what we've done this week, we've had a lot of fun. So starting out on Thursday morning, we started at Lux Row Distillers in Bardstown, Kentucky. Lux Row's not open to the public yet, but they are distilling, and it is Luxco. If you're not familiar with them, they own Rebel Yell. Just all sorts of older ones. I've suddenly forgotten all of
Ezra.
them.
Ezra Brooks.
Yeah.
David Nicholson.
David Nicholson. They have traditionally been a bottler out of St. Louis, Missouri. They've been in this game since the 1950s. But they've finally built their own distillery, and it will be open to the public soon.
And a major brand that we got to try over there was Blood Oath. And we'll talk about both Pack 3 and 4 as well.
Exactly. So what did you guys think of the distillery? I know, you at some point, at some level, you see a distillery and you've seen the distilleries. But
It looks like fermenters. It looks like a still.
indeed it does.
But the
Indeed it
visitor
does.
center is really well done.
Yeah.
They did a great job of that. I said it was similar to the Breckenridge distillery I was at because they have a great bar there in tasting center, but it's really well done, and they really focused on the family aspect of their business, and I thought it was cool.
Yeah, so good old boy Bob and I got to drop by Luxro on a hip waiter tour last fall, and it was just a mud pit that we were walking around most of the time. But most of the equipment was in place, and so there were two really great moments to see the point of transition. One, it's a fully functional distillery that's been running for about 6 weeks, and it was really great to see that the visitor center area. It's probably one of the more impressive ones in the area. I really liked it a lot.
They were already hanging merchandise in the visitor center too, so it is like, it's going to open like any moment. Like
think it's
April
11th.
tomorrow. Yeah.
April.
Gorgeous piece of property.
That's what
it is
impressed
really
me.
pretty.
Just the setting as you drive in the old house. It's what built in around 1800, so it's beautiful setting. I was very impressed with it.
And I don't know who else is. I was there for the groundbreaking, and then once over this, probably within a couple of weeks of when Mike was there. But we came in the back entrance today because we were on kind of a big bus. But the front entrance to it, the only thing that rivals it is Woodford Reserve. It is a gorgeous single-lane drive up. It meanders in some trees, some fences in the farmland. It's beautiful. And they really, again, like you said, the property they picked, they could not have found something better, and they're in the bourbon capital of the world in Bardstown. So.
Well, a couple of important transition points for Luxro is, if you weren't unfamiliar with their products, they have been contract distilling for some time. And this is actually their ability of actually running on their own gear for most of their products, not all of them. So it's a really great moment for that company, and to be kind of masters of their own brands as well. So I could tell the sense of pride and pop in John's step and a pep in his step, to say, I made that, because we all got to taste the distillate that was coming off. Amazing, wasn't it, Dan? We were talking about this.
I'm not a great judge, but I really liked it. I've tasted ours a lot, of course, but that was very, very smooth. And if it doesn't taste like kerosene, it's distillate 138 proof. You're doing something. If it's coming off the still that good, it's going to come out of the barrel 4, 5, 6 years later, whatever. Very, very good.
Yeah,
Garbage in, garbage out.
I got to have a really nice little side chat with John, talking about what it was going to be like to transition and keep some continuity with the brand and the profile and everything. And I think he has a really realistic and approach to how he's going to keep the profile as similar as possible, but it's not ever going to be 100% the exact same as what they've been contracting. And just to listen to his passion about getting to make it himself finally, I thought was really cool.
And the John we keep mentioning is John Rempe, who was previously the master blender for Luxco, and now he's the head of distilling, I think is his title. I don't think he's calling himself master distiller, which is probably smart considering he's been distilling for 6 weeks. But the worst kept secret in bourbon is that Luxco, almost all of their bourbon, if not all of it, has been sourced from Heaven Hill. The Lux family, Don Lux and his family, and the Shapira family who own Heaven Hill are best friends. And Don's dad died a while back, and I remember speaking to him a couple of times about how the Shapira family almost adopted him. And they go out of their way to make sure that Luxco is okay. It's long, even when they don't really have the capacity to do stuff for Luxco, they do stuff for Luxco. And it's great, and you really talk about how all these older families that have been around, and even the Luxes who haven't distilled before, but they've been in the business since the 50s. It's a very tight-knit community, especially in Kentucky. I'm sure it extends elsewhere as well.
Yeah.
Great to swing by Four Roses that day as well. We've been to Four Roses quite a bit, And I spent a lot of time with Dan, and the thing that I loved was, as many times as I've walked in rick houses with Dan, I still learned something new.
Every time.
And it just, it really, it was, it's always great to get back to Four Roses, surrounded by wonderful products. And it was just, it was great to be back, at Cox Creek. It was really fabulous.
Well, thank you. The distillery is still not open for tours yet. Of course, we've doubled our capacity. We've added a second column still, second doubler, second cooker, so those aren't all online. Hopefully within a month we'll have all the OSHA required procedures in place so we can get back into the distillery. It's completely reconfigured. You won't recognize it. If you've been there before, you won't recognize it now.
Wow.
We might need a mid-season bus.
Yes.
We get it open, we'll do that.
There
Absolutely.
are 2 S's in the bus club, in case anyone is wondering.
Maybe it was a good thing that I didn't go to Four Roses this year after all.
We didn't drink anything there, Jenny. We had
She's
already
channeling
had
her
it.
last experience there, which didn't quite end the way that Jenny thought it was going to end. So, yeah. Are we going to get to the Burnwood? I want to get to the part where we talk about all the Burnwood. Can we get to the part where we talked about Burnwood?
Let's talk about Burnwood.
Yeah.
I think Mike wants to
Burned.
talk about Burnwood.
I'll always love visiting Cooperages, and we went to Kelvin, which is a major cooperage here in the Louisville area. And the first thing that caught me off guard, I've been there previously, but we actually met in the front office, and I didn't know who all their customers were. And they had all of the products that were kind of laid out, on a table, talking a little bit about who the customers were. So it was really cool to kind of connect barrel with product, which I knew some of them, but when you see all those brands in front of you, so.
And to be fair, they don't. I've known Paul McLaughlin for a while, and from Kelvin Cooperage, and a lot of those they just have worked with once or twice. They have a lot of Jim Beam bottles, and they don't do anything for Jim Beam currently, but that I know of. But they're not that big of a cooperage.
Yeah.
And when you visit it, it's really cool because everything's done by like 5 guys doing it by hand. They have the big machines, but somebody's got to lift the barrel up
Yeah,
and put
not
it in there.
Brown
or the
Foreman.
staves. There is no jet of natural gas flames charring these things. They literally have 4 dudes throwing their excess oak shavings into a fire and then shoveling them inside a barrel to char them. And they stand there and they look, and it's by sight, smell, and feel that they say, this is the char we're looking for, and they pull the barrel off.
Wow.
And they
That
only
was
do 6 at a
impressive
time.
after seeing the huge ones like Brown Foreman and how different and how hands-on these guys didn't have.
And
They had hammers. They didn't
Yeah,
have machines. It
Well,
was
and the one thing I did as we were walking around is I did a finger count, and everybody had 10 fingers. Luckily, so.
And for the Scotch writer in the group, it was fascinating seeing the barrels coming in from the local distilleries in Louisville and what they're doing to prepare them to go to Scotland, and also the sherry butts that are sitting in there that are being brought back from Europe to age and finish some of the whiskeys in the U.S.
That's where most of our used barrels go, was Kelvin. They ship most of them back to Scotland. So, well, they're selling, I guess, some to breweries now, but Kelvin takes the vast majority of our used barrels.
I think that their used barrel program is exponentially larger than the new barrel.
Oh, absolutely.
I actually, off the top of my head, I don't remember what they said their capacity for new barrels was, but it is about a 5th, I think, of what they move every year. 90%. I would guess.
That was like a 10th, I think.
Yeah, maybe a 10th. So like 90% of what they do is buying used barrels, refurbishing the ones they can, and setting them on.
Pops, have you been there?
I did. We came down in October for our 5th anniversary and got a tour as well. And I think it was the highlight of our trip.
Well, do you use the charring, part of that facility as a personnel management process to say, listen, you're the new guy, just stand a little closer to the fire?
Exactly, right.
We will haze you if you would like to write for us.
Well, that's what I was going to say is the lawyers cannot like that tour. They would, if their lawyers were there, they would not have liked seeing how close we were to
That's
the fire.
worth
and
mentioning,
everything
though,
else.
'cause
That's why you guys kept on pushing me towards the fire, right?
There's
Push
embers
the lawyer
flying
a
everywhere.
little closer to the fire, yeah.
So for listeners who don't know, Kelvin is actually not open to the public.
No.
Randomly, you
Yeah.
can't just
So
call
don't-
or show
yeah,
up
don't
and
start
expect
calling.
to go on a tour. And there's a reason for that. It is, you are going to be
It's an
coughing at the
industrial
end.
site, yeah.
It is industrial. It is, the building has been there since 1910. right around World War One.
It's changed hands a couple of times.
But it's always been a cooperage.
Yeah.
And it is, you are indoors and they are burning oak. So let's just say that it's not exactly like a pleasant place environment.
Avail yourself of the pictures that we took there, and you'll get to see the inside of it.
It's hot. It's loud.
Very
There's
loud.
burning things flying in the air.
How we weren't wearing goggles, ear protection, and hard hats, I have no idea. But that's why they don't offer public tours.
I came back with most of my hair, so I'm glad.
And for any lawyers listening, we really enjoyed the tour and had no problems with it.
Nothing to worry about.
Well,
So,
go ahead.
right. I was going to say we did Kelvin Cooperage in the morning, and we did. Our next stop was Bernheim Distillery, which is Heaven Hill's main distillery in West Louisville. Now, a lot of people don't know because Heaven Hill always lists their address as Bardstown, Kentucky. But if you remember back in 1996, the actual distillery in Bardstown burned to the ground. It was basically
Big fire.
Seventh Circle of Hell. But so in order to fix that, or actually start distilling again, Heaven Hill bought a distillery from United Distillers, which was dormant at the time, and they refurbished it to fit their needs. And that is the Bernheim Distillery in West Louisville. I'd never been there before. I'm an unabashed Heaven Hill fanboy. I like their stuff. It's very low cost, and it tastes very good. And I don't know how you could fault them for that. But I'd always wanted to see where it's made. And Bernheim Distillery is not it's not what you think of when you think of the Kentucky distilleries. There's no scenic drive-in. There aren't any horses. There's no nice stone walls. It is a factory.
It is a
And
bourbon
it is
factory.
the largest
Nice wood fence. Negative.
facility. The size
Barbed wire fence.
of that
Check.
operation
And bullet
is
holes.
Bullet holes.
mind-boggling. They have 64-inch column stills within about 10 feet of each other, and these things are massive. I've never seen anything. I've never seen one.
I was aroused.
We noticed.
It was
He
yeah.
called you out on
It was difficult for me to continue the tour. I mean, seriously, I walked through hundreds of distillery and brewery tours, and to see 3 column stills that are 5 feet across in one room was just incredible. Yeah, I've never seen that before.
The doubler that was in the kind of where the third column still was is larger than the still, than the actual still pot still than any other one I've seen. It's massive. It's unbelievable how big that operation
But
is.
then we moved to the next room, which
Holy
I don't think
Calling it a room really.
it's more like a football field. So
And the pictures do no justice.
we forgot to. So I want to give a shout out to Josh, who was our tour guide
Josh Hafer.
from the
Heaven
PR
Hill
department. And so we had this real brief conversation when we walked into the plant. He said, "So we have the largest fermenters that you've ever seen." And I'm like, okay, game on, buddy. Because I've seen quite a bit. And I was thinking of the fermenters that are at Sierra Nevada in Asheville. Because it's 80,000 gallons, I believe, that are in these fermenters at the brewery, and there's actually 8 of them, I believe, and you can see them from orbit. They're so big. So I'm like, okay, those are the biggest ones I've seen. Then we walk into this room, 124,000 gallons.
17 of them.
Just a little bump up.
It was just,
It was 180, wasn't it?
124.
124.
They had one of them that was 200.
123,800.
Yeah,
was
it's
what it
200
was.
gallons
you.
short,
Wes,
which is
I appreciate
why
it.
there's a shortage of the Parker's Reserve. In case anyone's wondering.
Wow.
200 gallons.
If you fell in one of these things, they would not find you for weeks. Okay?
They would ferment 95,000 batches before they knew you were in there. Like a bone would wind up in someone's Elijah Craig, and they'd be like, "What the hell is that finger bone doing?"
By
The
comparison,
special bone edition.
by comparison, ours at Four Roses are 26,000 gallons. So those are 5 times bigger than
Wow.
our.
The massive stills we were talking about, it takes 6 full runs of 3 stills to fill one fermenter.
And I can remember that number because I've had less Elijah Craig barrel proof than the rest of the group.
Catch up.
Speaking of that, this was the bourbon we had last time on this too.
No, we had Elmer. Yeah, so we're all sitting around sipping on some Elijah Craig barrel proof. This is batch C917. Last time we had some Elmer T. Lee brought by the folks at Bottom of the Barrel Bourbon who are not with us this year.
And Bill wanted to get rid of this bottle, and
I think mission
Mission
accomplished.
Thank you. we took this as a challenge. We succeeded. We will be dipping into secondary stocks shortly. Actually, I see that we already have. And we're going to leave. So we just finished talking about Heaven Hill's Bernheim facility, and the next stop on our tour actually happened to be Angel's Envy, and this was yet another one I hadn't seen before. It's a very new facility, and it is very clean. They made sure that we knew that.
Shiny.
I'd like to point out Bill's the only one among us that lives in Louisville.
Well, I also have young children, so I
Only?
don't get to have fun at all.
Well, a
He's afraid they
twofer,
would make him clean it if he,
Yeah,
if he
so
went there
it's-
too often.
a twofer that was going on with visiting Angel's Envy. So, one, most of us had never been there, and this is the first time that I got to chat with Wes or Kyle since the buyout with Bacardi. And so it was kind of really cool to see both the context of the conversation about their operation, relationship, with Bacardi, as well as seeing that facility that is in downtown Louisville as well.
Is this the point we sell out, Kyle?
No, that comes in
will.
about 10 minutes.
We were joking with Kyle, and,
Yeah.
and he said some things that were funny, but in complete jest, so we
Yes.
won't sell them out.
Yeah.
The Kyle we're speaking of is Kyle Henderson. His grandfather, Lincoln Henderson, and his father, Wes, were the founders of Angel's Envy. And again, I don't think many of us, had anyone been there before?
I had
No.
not.
I've been there
Pops
before,
is
but I
really
wasn't
good.
with you yesterday, so.
So we can all talk about it. Beautiful facility, right in downtown Louisville, right across
Was
the
it
street from
shiny,
Slugger
Pops?
Field.
Against the
Shiny.
grain.
And
Yeah, Shiny
which is
is
against the
exactly
Grain
right.
Brewery, which we love here in Louisville. And if you've never been there, it is a great tourist stop, and the location is great for it. What the location isn't great for is actually making whiskey. It's on
Logistics.
Main Street, which means that getting semi trucks in and out of that is not easy. Because I don't know about any place else. Louisville's not the biggest city in the world. It's not the smallest, but we do have what they call traffic, and we saw kind of the way that it works. They're squeezed for space in the storage areas. The tourist areas are great, but we went back where they were actually storing the barrels, and you could barely. They couldn't have squeezed many
There's
more. in
nowhere to go but up.
there. Yeah. So.
Everyone around this table's been to many distilleries, and I think we can all agree that if you're in downtown Louisville, you should stop in. It's a beautiful, beautiful facility.
Gorgeous.
In the cleanest distillery you will probably ever go into.
And we had a great tour. Kyle was really good. He knew his stuff. He's hands-on there at the distillery. It's very interesting seeing that versus some of the older distilleries that require a much larger force of people to maintain on a daily basis. They were talking about a handful of people doing the operations because computers control a lot of it. It is about as modern as it gets. Maybe Peerless might be the only one that's more automated. That's the one where you basically push a button and then walk away and come back a day later and you've got 2-year-old bourbon.
Peerless is the Keurig of the craft bourbon.
I've never heard that put before, but that is the best
yes.
description I've ever heard of Peerless.
Kyle said the cleanest distillery you'll ever walk into, and absolutely, oh my God,
Pristine.
you could have probably had eggs off the floor, and they would have, been gorgeous. I mean, it was just, it was so spick and span. I was like, what? Are these all props? Because I don't even know how you're.
It was to the point that under one of their fermenters, there was a puddle the size of my cell phone, and I noticed it because everything else was spick and span, shiny, clean, and there was one little puddle where something had dripped.
And you wondered if they would shut down to clean it.
Yeah.
I think it was
beautiful.
Matt that was
I
dripping.
was about to say that was actually the mash that Matt probably spilled all over you, for the third time.
I was so this weekend I was a target for everyone else's food
should
mishaps.
have worn a poncho the whole
I
time.
actually had pickled pig's feet poured all over me by
They were
someone.
knuckles. They
Whatever.
were just knuckles.
Poured all over me at dinner on Thursday night. Hot sauce on Friday, and then mash exploded out of the Heaven Hill
And you and the
fermenter
camera.
all over me and my camera. So
It's a money shot.
Hey.
I'm completely off my game now. You guys take it away.
And scene.
I would like to say one thing about Kyle, and anyone at this table knows that you can't get me to say something nice about anybody to save my life. But I met Kyle
I'm well aware.
the
Thank you.
first time maybe 3.5 years ago. He was right out of school at Florida State, and He showed up over at the Filson Academy, shared a pre-prohibition bourbon with us, but he was young, and the difference in seeing him yesterday and 3.5 years ago was his maturity, his understanding of this business, his passion for it, his just everything about. I was really impressed with him. I'm excited to see what he does.
I was thinking the same thing. I last saw Kyle 3 years ago at a tasting in Nashville, and yeah.
He's a lot better looking than Wes. So there you go.
I'd never met Kyle before, and if you didn't know him 3 years ago, I would have thought he grew up in a distillery, because he knew what was going on. He knew that
his
place.
His depth of understanding of everything going on there was.
And I felt like safety
notch.
was paramount with the vest.
So then.
Good stuff. So that was kind of the last of the stuff we did as the bus club, and we moved on from that. So that was yesterday, which was Friday. The first actually official event of the Bourbon Classic was Friday night, and that is the culinary and cocktail competition. This is the first year they had moved locations, so the main event is always at the Kentucky Center for the Performing Arts, which is where they'd always had this competition. Last year they moved it to, this year they moved it to Glassworks, just a couple blocks away. It's a very popular kind of wedding facility here in Louisville. You have a lot of wedding receptions and things like that there. What did everybody think about it? My main opinion is I would have preferred it remained where it had been in the past.
Ditto.
Did not like the venue.
My main opinion is don't wear a sweater and a sports coat.
It was 1,000 degrees.
There were 5 times too many
I
people
don't know if
in
they were
that room.
actually firing glass in there
Yeah,
somewhere.
it does say Foundry in the name of the location, so maybe we should have expected that.
Here, we're going to do something really quick over here. Jenny, you and I are going to play rocks, paper, scissors, see who says cotton candy first. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
I don't know what that just happened. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You
What
know.
is
Cotton
3
candy.
fingers?
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
It's a weird
the
scissors.
cocktail that made that impressed me last night.
Oh,
Yes, yes, that was it. The Chinar infused cotton candy that was clipped to the side of the cocktail that you kind of used as a chaser. I thought that was very creative,
Most
interactive,
impressive
and
garnish I think I've seen in a long time. Yeah.
As
That
a
was fun.
chaser, I ate it first.
So my favorite cocktail of the night was actually someone who wasn't even in the competition. It was the jalapeno one over by the entrance.
E.H. Taylor?
E.H.
Yeah.
Taylor.
Yeah,
it
that
was
was
E.H.
H. Taylor.
Small
Yeah.
batch.
Anything that hot and spicy, if you give me a hot and spicy competition, food eating, I'll try it.
For me, both Blantons were outstanding. Both the Blantons.
yeah, Volare did a
cocktails.
great job with the food with that too. They were really on.
By far my favorite Italian restaurant in Louisville, Volare, and they did a fantastic job with the food.
Does anybody know who won?
The Remus actually won.
Wow. So this was a layered drink of Zinfandel that was floated on top of a
Yeah,
citrus infused.
New York
it was
sour.
original.
Yeah.
It was original. I thought it was okay. It was one of my top 3rd, but I would not have put it in my top 2 or 3.
Pops, which one did you like?
I don't remember anything about the drinks.
Or
There was
care?
food.
The food, I have to say, from the food perspective, I think the deviled eggs that got rolled
That was
out the
fantastic.
second half were just
I missed
Yeah,
those.
What about the mushroom pate?
Fantastic.
Anyone have that?
I skipped the mushroom.
and ham.
I like the short rib on squash. That was really
agree with
good.
that.
Yeah, and Carrie Ann and I were talking. I think our favorite thing was absolutely the bread pudding at Four Roses.
My
Oh,
favorite
that was
pairing of the night was the
was
Four
not
Roses
sweet, that was
bread pudding
pudding.
with the cocktail
Yeah.
that they did.
I actually-
Everything
that was
else,
one
I'm
of
not
my
on the
least
pairing fan.
On the pairing, because I thought that it wasn't sweet enough to to stand up to the bitterness of the cocktail. And if I drank the two and I took a bite, took a drink, took a bite, took a drink, I could not taste the bread pudding. Just couldn't taste it. The bitterness just overwhelmed it.
I wasn't that
I'm
technical
clearly in
with
the
it.
minority, so everyone else discuss
No, I
amongst
was
yourselves.
I was glad that bread pudding was not sweet though. It was a nice savory, sweet.
I thought both the dish and the cocktail were fantastic. I didn't think they were the best match. That's just my opinion, and I'm not the cocktail guy, so
It's just
again.
obviously wrong.
Well,
Let's listen to all of you guys
Yes.
who know what you're
The
talking
mushroom-
about with cocktails. Please educate.
The mushroom pate with the ham and just the flavors that came across in that. I took a picture, sent it to my wife, and said, "Could you make this?"
What was the
Sure
what was
thing.
the soup from the first ones that was so good? Oh,
I
it was
don't
the
remember
gumbo. There was a
soup.
chicken
Oh,
gumbo.
the gumbo,
yeah.
Oh my goodness, that was amazing.
That was good.
I didn't actually get to try it, but I think the impressiveness of just going out and saying, I'm going to do this. The 21C restaurant did like a foie gras and sherry lollipop for their
Yeah.
contemporary
Yeah, I remember
dish.
It was really
That
good.
was good.
That was
That was-
unique.
You could start any sentence with foie gras. I don't really care whatever comes after that. You can just say anything else. You had me at foie
Is
gras.
four gras better than 3 gras?
Right, correct, yeah. Hang on a second. Let me turn your mic off. Well, Jenny and I always think about food pairings quite a bit on a lot of our shows. I mean, what did you think about, kind of the food pairings themselves? We kind of talked about some of the individual dishes.
I don't know if there was anything that I had that I thought, these two things in
Really go
particular,
together, yeah.
bring up the level of both.
Yeah.
I thought I had some really good food. I had some really good drinks, but I didn't really have anything that I thought, these two need to go together in particular. But
And in the setting where you're holding everything and standing up and trying to eat with 2 hands and holding a drink, you're not really. Evidently, Bill found a way to eat and drink and
It's the 3-finger
alternate.
method.
But I mean, it's just a little
This was
difficult
Wes's
to get the
innovation.
full.
Was that a
effect
Trump
of
thing?
Of pairings.
Make cocktails great again?
Let's not go there.
Well, and I think a lot of us have recalled, how that's been done at a lot of the, past years. And I think the thing that struck me about this year is, one, it seemed like a dwarfed version of this. And
Fewer teams, right?
yeah, I think
lot fewer.
fewer teams. And I thought the quality of what was being done in terms of actually looking, because it is a pairing event. It's not who makes the best drink and who makes the best food. They're looking at, kind of a pairing
They
activity.
should collaborate.
I don't know. I just something got lost between the bartenders and the chefs somewhere along the way that it didn't seem to kind of come together
There
really
were
well.
a lot of them that I thought probably had never met before they actually set up the tables.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
I think bourbon cocktails are very difficult to pair with. Period. It's a very difficult base liquor to try and stand up with enough food. That's why I like the squash and the short rib. I thought that stood up to the bourbon well.
I think you need a bold food to pair with a bourbon cocktail, because in order to make a cocktail with bourbon, it needs to be really on the bitter side or really on the sweet side, because otherwise all you're going to taste is that bourbon, that corn. And, there were so many really delicate, nice, sweet, nice plates, and I was kind of like, someone has never tried to pair with bourbon before, because bourbon needs bold food. It either needs to be spicy or sweet or something. You need to match the sweetness or offset it. You don't do that with delicate and
Yeah, there was some great food there. There was some sort of short rib situation, and I just wanted whiskey. I didn't want a cocktail with it. I just wanted.
I agree. Yeah.
But I think that's the problem that we all run into with this event, is that it's not really the cocktail night is not necessarily the whiskey lovers night. It's the
Yeah.
That's the foodies night.
it's the
food
foodie
night,
night.
yeah.
Really, you could remove the cocktails and just have pours of bourbon, and everyone would be just as happy at the end of the night.
That's
Well,
what we're
most
doing
people.
tonight, though.
For someone who's not from Louisville, though, and we haven't mentioned this, the table, and I don't know the chef, but the table that had the Blantons, the beef, and
Bourguignon.
Bourguignon, I went back 3 times.
I thought that one was delicious.
Did they
I'm
cut
with you.
It
was
to
nice.
me,
cut you
It was
off.
asked for a to-go box.
It was-
and that
Yeah.
it was
not
mine.
appropriate.
it was my favorite of the night by
That
far.
was so they switch. They do the classic pairing and then the contemporary pairing. And I remember Larry last night saying, I did not realize that they were going to switch, and he had
He loaded
filled
it
up
up.
completely
Larry
on
from the
the
Bourbon
first
Guys
round.
is not with us today, but the word of the day was, I did not know there was a second round. Who did not tell me? Why did you not tell me? there
No,
was a
Larry
second
would say
round?
the word of the
He
day
took
is
full-
duck fat.
Yeah, so some of us went home and went to bed, and some of us did not. And those who didn't got the opportunity at Milkwood last night to have a duck fat cocktail that was out of this world.
That was amazing. That was the best cocktail I had of the night.
It was a
Chef
good
Bourbon?
cocktail, yeah.
One behind the bar at Milkwood
You ever
is
had
going places.
Pops, you ever had a duck fat cocktail?
I have not.
It was a
well,
duck fat infused gin.
Gin.
Yeah.
Oh, gin.
Yeah.
Milkwood
Interesting.
being the second restaurant opened by celebrity chef Edward Lee of Louisville.
He's
That
got
was-
himself a fine bartender.
Yeah, she did a great job. The guy behind the bar who made that
I think y'all
cocktail
are
was
talking
amazing.
about 2 different people, so that's
But some of us couldn't join that because we were
Well-
trying to get others home.
You know,
Juan.
Juan.
So
Juan was great, and then makeup tips with the other bartender, that was great. So
today is Saturday, which is the main event for the Bourbon Classic. So we start out with Bourbon University in the mid-afternoon, I guess you would call it. What's everyone looking forward to? What sessions are you guys looking at before we get to the main event?
The bourbon and ham pairing.
Yeah. I'm with you on that
It's
one.
always the one.
That does, yeah. Those we were saying you have to get there early to get into that one. That one fills up
Well,
every year.
It's ham
Yeah, so
and
the-
chocolate this year,
Ham,
right?
chocolate, and bourbon pairings.
Steve Coombs is in on that panel. Some
Kelly
of the
from
other
Art Eatables.
panels,
Which one is Marianne Barnes on this year?
she's doing the craft panel.
There is a craft panel, and I am
like
actually
that one,
looking
yeah.
forward to that one.
I think that's the one
That'll
I'll
be
probably go
exciting.
to. Yeah.
I like the panel with Fred No, and I think it's Pam and
Pam from
and
Michter's, Fred, and
who's the third person? I forgot.
we just said.
Anyway, yeah, that was the one I was.
We're all
looking
very
for.
well prepared, in
Yeah.
case you're wondering.
So
Is Fred moderating? Fred Minnick
No.
moderating? him?
No, he's on a panel though.
He's on the general session
yeah.
panel with
Yeah.
I
some
don't think
other
they're doing
journalists.
the Bourbon Masters this year, right?
No. The closest to it is the little seminar with Fred No and someone else that we really like.
You know, the one thing I really love about this event, this crew really goes to a ton of festivals. I mean, we've seen each other probably 5-6 times, a year. And the one thing that I know that we really enjoy about this particular event is really getting to see the people. I don't know so much that, these particular events that we've talked about are really kind of the showpieces. I really think this is a borderline trade tasting because of the number of people that really come out for this event, a lot of good media representation, and a lot of good representation from the industry, a lot of master distillers, a lot of good people that are involved in the operational areas for a lot of the distilleries here in Kentucky. So I really love that.
Yeah.
You could, if I live here in Louisville, so I will say, if you want to do something bourbon related, where there's a master distiller, you can do it pretty much every weekend in Louisville. It's always happening. A dinner, some sort of charity event, something. This one, the Bourbon Affair, and a couple other ones just seem to be like the big things where people like dress up and they make sure that like we're always going to have our master distiller available on this weekend. We're always going to be there. We're always going to have a table, and they're not sending their B teams. They send this is one of the events that you should come to, and it's because a lot of people just come to it. This is one of the first ones that started. It's one of the biggest ones. They do a really good job with the main event tonight. So I'm really looking forward to tonight. But before we really get into the main event, there was another event that happened this week that I don't think most of us got to except for Pops. And that was a release of a 45-year-old bourbon.
Yes, indeed.
Tell us how awesome that was.
Let's
All
just
about
say, happy to be there. Experience of a lifetime. And,
How many bottles did you buy?
Experience of a lifetime. No, I mean the event itself. Before I talk about the whiskey itself, fantastic event. Obviously, they raised just short of $250,000 in the sales of
that's
these
amazing.
bottles.
Wow.
For those who are familiar, it's a 45-year-old bourbon, and they decided to release 100 bottles for sale, packaged in a nice container with a sample bottle, the full bottle, some piece of the barrel staves, glass, and sold that, raised $250,000, donated to military benefit, and they actually brought in a Congressional Medal of Honor winner to the event. So, fantastic event. So, everyone who attended got an opportunity to taste. They brought out 2 glasses for each person. One was a neat pour of the 45-year-old bourbon, and then a pour with a little bit of sherry added. And the sherry came into play because they brought in Bill Thomas from Jack Rose, and we're talking about how people would doctor the whiskey to help alleviate some of the wood tannins, and he said add sherry. So we got to taste it, and I'll be perfectly honest, it's exactly what you would expect it to be. I think I said it was
Garbage.
hyper sweet on the front, followed by a wave of super oaky tannins, like being chewing on a wet log.
Rotting canoe.
And I think there was a touch of sadness involved. I mean, it was, take a wet log from a river and chomp on it, and this was not as good. And I have to be honest, the addition of the sherry was horrible.
That's sad.
But, everybody going into it, nobody went into this event thinking this was going to be utterly amazing. There's
Best
a reason.
thing you ever tasted.
Yeah, there's a reason there's no 45-year-old bourbons, right? So it was for a good cause. It was tasty. Check that list. But I would, I know people bought the bottles and flipped them Some were flipped for $5K 2 hours later.
7,500 yesterday morning.
7,500.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
So it's about the collection. It's about things of that nature. But great bucket list, and I'm glad I'm here to live to tell about it.
So I think there's some good takeaways from this particular experience that you talked about, because we all look at how consumers react to aged products, and everybody's always chasing things that have tremendous age, and in this case, it was a one-off novelty, experience of it. And we've had products as recently as just in the last year that were released that were in that 24, 27 year space, and you guys are all nodding your heads, going yeah, and they're going for major bucks too on top of that. And how many of us have had some of those products and went, wow, would you mind extracting the stave out of my left cheek?
Yeah.
And I've even tried, and that's a Scotch trick about adding, sherry. And so my trick is actually using a spritzer, like a martini spray, and you just spray the inside of the glass before you actually pour the liquid in there. I don't know if you guys did it that way.
I don't think they did.
Yeah, so you drop some sherry into into a spray bottle,
Great idea.
and you just spray the inside of the glass. Let the glass fully drain. So all you're really just left with is kind of a residue layer of sherry, and then add. Everybody was always saying these products are over oaked. Is kind of the the trick question, and. So if you run into a product that you think has maybe a bit too much wood on it, might try that trick. It might make it a little bit more enjoyable. Personally, I mean, I tend to look for the inflection point with water, to actually temper a lot of the wood tannins, that Pop's talked about.
I think a good note, as you guys were all together doing the tour. I went on a series of media events for the bulk of this week.
Who was on the real bus?
The real bus. Well, next year I'll go with you guys. How about that? But we stopped at Michter's, and they gave us a great tour, great tasting. Rolled out about 11 different whiskeys to try at the end of the trip, and one of them was their 25. And I've had the 20. Their 20 is one of my favorites in the last couple of years that came out, not because I can afford to buy a bottle, but because someone else did. And I tried the 25, and it tipped the scales. It went oak. And I don't like that super oaky. So it's, once again, people get excited about it because it's 5 more years.
Yeah.
There's an inflection point for everything.
Yeah.
Those 5 more years only matter on the label.
I'm still
Everything
giving
else.
I'm still giving tours at New Riff. That's one of my side jobs that I still do, just because I really love giving tours. And I take it as my own personal chance to try and educate the general public a little bit more about bourbon and whiskey. And that's one of the things I always talk about, is that everyone always thinks, as the general public, that the older the better, that's always what works. But I always add that into my tours, even though it's not on my script. Just, this is the difference between bourbon and Scotch. This is why Scotch has to be a little bit older. This is why bourbon ages a little bit faster. You got to understand that difference, because
by a little bit you mean a lot faster. Sorry, I censor myself.
And as the World Whiskies writer here, I would say, drink the 25-year-old Scotch, not the 25-year-old bourbon.
Without a doubt.
Exactly.
Without a doubt.
Amen.
So there are bourbons, and Heaven Hill's a great example, because they a couple of years ago they took the 12 age statement off the Elijah Craig. Their stuff should not be aged past 12 years. People go nuts over the 18-year Elijah Craig, the 21 or whatever the other ones they've done, the 23-year-old Evan Williams. It gets successively worse after 12 years. Their juice should stop aging at about 12 years. The 9 to 12-year range is kind of the ideal place for them.
The vast majority of bourbon, if you ask any of the master distillers, Jimmy Russell, Jim Rutledge, whoever, 6 to 9 years is so the things that can age past that are such a minuscule part of our inventory, and they're typically, and you've got to talk about tier. Where is that barrel aging? The lower the tier, the cooler the aging process. It picks up less wood. So I've done a lot of barrel selections and over the years, and I've seen. The last 2 or 3 times we've done barrel selections, they've picked the youngest whiskey, but it was the darkest because it was a tier 6 for us. So that is a huge deal. So I'll shut it up from there.
We've been talking about the Bourbon Classic here in Louisville, Kentucky. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the future. We've talked about the past a lot, especially the recent past. But I want to talk a little bit about bourbon. So 2017 in American whiskey, Whiskey Advocate named Elijah Craig Barrel Proof Batch B517 as their Whiskey of the Year. When it came out, Modern Thirst and a lot of other places said, this is the best Elijah Craig that's come out in a long time. And there's no doubt about that. Whiskey Advocate, well, there is doubt about that. You're certainly welcome to argue that. A lot of places said it was great. The difference was that this year, Whiskey Advocate named it the Whiskey of the Year. And I kind of stepped back from that and said, really? I didn't say it was the best whiskey I've had this year. I didn't say it was phenomenal. I just said it was the best that they've done for Elijah Craig Barrel Proof.
In a while.
At least in a while, but in whatever you could remember in the recent past. My issue with it was it started a big discussion on social media of what was the whiskey of the year for 2017, what really stood out. And what really kind of stood out to us is that maybe some private barrel picks were the best things, but there seemed to be kind of a fall off from 2016 where there was a lot of really innovative product hitting the market.
Is it innovative picking a barrel?
Innovative picking a barrel.
Yeah, I yawn.
Yeah.
Innovative barrel picking, I think you should call it.
But I kind of felt like in a
Palates
lot.
are like those things everybody has. I mean, so I don't think you can just pick one person's or one store's or one selection and call it the best
You're
of
right.
anything.
No,
because
true.
There
that's-
should
No
be a
way.
It's
separate
ridiculous.
for single barrel picks should have a completely
Yeah.
separate. Regardless, I felt like 2017 when I kind of posed the question to other people on social media and other writers, we had a really hard time coming up with not just finding what the whiskey of the year was, but what stood out to us in 2017. And we had a really hard time even coming up with nominees for it. And it kind of came back to us, yeah, I guess B517 was all right.
Yeah.
Take that.
I remember an email that good old boy Mike sent out saying, hey, what's y'all's picks for best whiskey of the year? And it was crickets.
Yeah.
Indeed.
I mean, we ended up picking up Kentucky All Rye as one of the 6 products that we named. But
They do
even
top
if
that.
even if you look at the other 4 or 5, we named in that. I mean, they were just annual releases of some other really great products. Four Roses limited edition, 2017 was on the list. So
I don't think Four Roses ever put out a limited edition that wasn't really good. Just there's some years that just like
Yeah.
explode when you drink them. They explode on the palate, and there's some years that are just like, oh, this is pretty good.
I thought this
Real
year was
similar to
pretty
something else.
excellent, but it was a little overshadowed by the Al Young release, too.
Yeah, and personally, it all depends on your personal taste. I understand why people like the Al Young, but that 23-year-old, particularly if you just opened a bottle fresh and started, once the Al Young sat and got some air to it, that the woodiness kind of dissipated.
and rye.
And I just liked the limited edition small batch better for me because I'm more of a sugar daddy caramel guy, and it didn't have that older whiskey.
I thought you were
in it.
just my sugar daddy.
But
Everyone's my sugar daddy.
everyone in
He
the
was on Thursday.
everyone in the blogosphere is talking about the single barrel picks in 2017 and being the big thing of 2018. But when you think about it,
Yawn.
you're going to have most bourbon drinkers are going to buy 2 bottles of that, and you're going to have 100 people who are going to get that specific barrel of whiskey.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
And that's
why
not even-
spend so much time talking about it?
That's not even fair because you could find a single barrel pick of anything that could be the whiskey of the year, just depending on whether you happen to find that one just cherry barrel of Buffalo
Yeah,
standard
but that's
Buffalo
not the
Trace.
art of making
That
whiskey.
doesn't-
The
that
art
doesn't
is
count.
blending it and
You are
putting
right.
it out in a batch that everybody gets to have some.
100%.
Just remember, Bill,
Yeah.
your barrel pick was someone else's rejected barrel pick.
Right.
Bow.
Exactly.
And
My
I
barrel
mean,
pick was the best barrel pick that's ever been done.
For that,
I mean,
that
it
month.
used to be barrel picks were exciting because people had access to things that no one else was getting. So now that it's ubiquitous, and
Now they're
it-
winners
it-
and losers.
right, and true, barrel picks are when you go to a bar. I mean, I go for their barrel picks because I want something a little bit different, and that's the trend. But as you're saying, yawn. You
Well,
know, it's
I'm-
going to get old real fast. So what's next?
Everybody knows that, like, even the small guys are getting on the barrel picks now. Like,
Right.
the craft, small distilleries are doing. You can do a single barrel pick of that, and
Well,
like,
I think I'm going to jump all over this and say I think the word I would use about this trend is it's distracting. I think it's distracting for the consumer. I think it's distracting for the distillery. I think it is time consuming and not adding value in the retail channel. And I would really like, especially for.
I think retailers would argue with you all day.
Right.
Yeah, they would.
I would
for
like.
sure.
I would like the producers getting back to driving the taste profile for their products, and I can think of a few products where the taste profile has become so fragmented between the single barrel pick program and their master distiller blend that you're not really quite sure what's in the bottle, anymore.
I've got to say this: this high-end bourbon business is becoming very much like the wine business. Y'all are drinking everything, where traditionally the old school
Thank you.
marketing was.
You're welcome.
All of it. We
we're-
are drinking all of it.
Did I get a free T-shirt?
Challenge.
All of it.
Well, it's back in the day, your father was drinking Jim Beam or whatever, and that's the only thing he drank.
I think
and
you meant
it's
yellow.
Yellow
Roses
label, yellow label.
is what grandfathers were drinking.
and well, my grandmother more so. So it's a completely different attitude and mindset. People, it's become the wine business. It's very, very fragmented. You're 100% right with that.
I have a thought on that, and Wes, maybe you chime in here, because I think America is one of the few places that put all this emphasis on the distiller. In Scotland and Ireland, it's on the blender, and the blender is who's the guy that's making it taste what it's supposed to taste like. And now we're like, oh no, we all want our own special thing.
Well, yeah, no, it's people want to create their own taste. So I think it's that everyone's so excited about
It's a
bourbon.
control issue.
They want to be able to have like that little bit of
unique.
ownership, that little bit of thing that says I'm connected to this.
I made this.
Yes.
I picked that.
And if I'm buying the bottle, I want something that someone else can't have.
It's
Because
my
I
sticker.
can't find Pappy,
Right.
therefore, but I can have a single barrel of.
And Carrie Ann, you talk about, I'm a historian by training. I would say a lot of that comes back to just this American individuality. It carries over into our bourbon and our whiskey, where we want to have something that's unique and have something that's uniquely mine, that this is my bottle from this barrel or whatever, and I picked it. That is not the case in Scotland. They're
Well-
trying to make something that, in my opinion, is there's more. I would say you may disagree with this. I say there's more history. They're trying to keep a tradition from that whiskey
And that's
going.
the harder job than going and picking a barrel that tastes totally like nothing that you've ever tasted.
But y'all are completely discounting the single malt market. The single malts availability. Back when I started in the business, you had Glenfiddich, Glenlivet, and maybe one other one.
Doers.
Well, that's blended. So if you look at
I just threw up a little bit.
if you look at the amount of the single malt scotches that are available today, the same thing's going on with that as well.
But it's still a spec in their inventory of what they're doing. It's still majority blended. But where is that market skyrocketing? In the United States.
Do you think that has more to do with like the cultural differences as far as the importance of individuality in the United States versus? So I used to live in England
mentality?
for a little bit while, yeah, and it was like I was always surprised when I was in England, how I don't want to say conformist, but just to my American eyes, it seemed like everyone was kind of listening to the same music, kind of wearing the same style of clothes. Like there's such a small variety of like television channels to listen to.
Oh, I think it'd make a great dissertation. I agree. I think American, some other markets have driven that single malt growth from Scotland and other areas.
China for sure.
And I always have this argument with people is, we're all big whiskey drinkers, right? We know a lot, right? And we are, in terms of growth, deep thoughts, I know, thank you. We are such a small part of the market. I mean, when you look at the growth and you look at all the scaling that's being done by all the distilleries, we're the noisy minority, right, about this thing. So all the growth, the big growth is not worried about the single barrel picks. They're not worried about that individuality. So I always try to balance the conversation about what we want as the whiskey geeks, bourbon nerds, whatever,
Exactly.
versus where they're selling the volume, and they have to balance that, which is hard.
It is, yeah.
But to the other side, I look at where does innovation come into the U.S. market, and for me, it's the craft, it's the blending, it's the people who are willing to say, I don't need to taste like this. I'm going to create a forge a new path. That's what gets me excited.
So is the future of America, this is something that I've been struggling with for a while, is the future of American whiskey craft distilleries who are trying to replicate what the big distilleries do?
No.
Or should
No.
the craft
No.
distilleries be out there saying, I'm going to find a new mash bill, I'm going to do a single malt, I'm going to do something
they
really
need to be their
unique.
own man, own
They need
women,
to own
and
it.
own it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
absolutely.
craft distilleries are really
Welcome to
driving
Texas.
innovation, and the big distilleries are
Except for
picking up on trying to kind of mimic what craft is doing, not the other way around.
Not
Craft
us.
is really driving this whole movement of being innovative and making something a little
I
different.
say boring in Japanese, Dan.
And I would argue that we need to create an American single malt category. I mean,
I think
a
that's
lot of those,
coming.
I think
a
that's
lot
coming,
of,
yeah.
a lot of those
Short
craft
term.
distilleries. That's the area where they're going to make their name. They're not going to compete with the Four Roses, the Jim Beams,
No.
and the others. But they're going
Yeah.
to make a name in something that is uniquely
Until they get-
Colorado,
until
or
they get bought by one
or
of those.
as Justin Timberlake would say, Montana whiskey or something. But
That Blanton's Montana whiskey.
So, not to interrupt everyone here, but we don't have a lot of time left on this podcast. But I want to go around the table and I want to say everyone's tasted a lot of stuff this weekend. I want everyone to name what is the favorite thing you've tasted and what is the worst thing you've tasted this weekend. And you've got to be specific on the brand here. So we're going to throw some people under the bus.
The bus. Speaking of the bus, I just want to give a quick shout out to David at Oak Barrel Tours. He's a new company here in Louisville doing a great little tour and service and just another option for your transportation needs. And he drove our
awesome.
sorry asses around on
fantastic-
Thursday. He was fantastic.
Fantastic.
He was
experience for
overqualified.
everyone.
The bus was really pretty before we were on it.
Yes.
Y'all get what's left
He
over.
did a great job. It was a good time, and I highly recommend him.
OakBarrelTours.com.
So let's start with Matt here. What's the best thing you had this weekend?
It might be this barrel proof I'm drinking right now, or I
This is
just
the
drank.
C917. Is that what we said?
And I picked
Yes.
up one of these at the gift shop
Elijah
as well.
Craig Barrel Proof C917 that is now empty.
I don't know if I would have had a worst
Did-
until this morning, where I decided to take off your bar that Winchester. I was like, I need to understand how bad this is.
You're a brave
TerraPure-
man.
TerraPure. It was a TerraPure Winchester Extra Smooth. If you look on ModernThirst.com, it is the lowest ranking whiskey we have ever reviewed.
That TerraPure system.
Super fast
Dan,
extra
Can
aging
you
is
take part in this?
great.
I'm gonna refrain.
Dan- Dan
look,
abstains.
fair.
Well, look, I don't have a great palate, so nobody needs to take my lead on
If-
what
Please.
anything is
If you
good or
don't
bad.
want, if you
Emoji
don't want to
eye
bash
roll.
someone, I completely understand. I didn't mean to throw anyone under the bus on that. But if anyone has anything awesome that they want to point out that they tasted, feel free.
Well,
Well, we didn't talk about what we drank at Lux Row, and
Well, I was
going to
mention
was
that.
some pretty fun
yeah,
stuff.
a
absolutely.
good
I'd not
opportunity.
tasted that before.
Hey.
I really liked that
Yeah, the
stuff
Pack
just because
4
I've not
I
had it before.
really,
So
really like.
The number 4 that's still coming out.
Yes, it hasn't come out yet.
So
but
Carrie Ann,
it's coming.
Tell us about
coming.
you have some opinions here.
Yeah, so y'all help me out on the memory. So the Pack 4 is
Toasted.
finished in a barrel that the
was-
char has been removed.
They refurbished
From-
the barrel,
Took
so they
it
scraped
out.
out the inside of it, recharred it, and then
Toasted
they
it.
re-aged
Toasted.
it.
Toast
By
it.
toasting,
There's
sorry,
no
not charring.
char in the
It's
second.
toasted.
Anyway, it was
Yeah.
delicious. I
Toast
really
finish.
enjoyed it.
It-
I like
it's
that.
the
Thanks,
first
John.
blood oath that I've thought is really worth the retail price.
I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that
That's
one.
pretty good. It'll be interesting how the branding concept of the Blood Oath line will play into something that's really quite good in that line. Because you and I were chatting about the first two versions, first Pack 1 and 2, and it's like, yeah.
They were fine. If they weren't charging 90 to 100 bucks.
Yeah, the value
I'm all
proposition was
105.
off of
It was
that.
39 bucks. I'm all in.
That's what he said. They want to keep improving it, and they have.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of what John does, John Rempe. He's really an enthusiast who happens to have become very good at blending and happens to have been involved with this. And I think it's fantastic. If my life could be different, I would be like, how can I become a guy who just makes the bourbons?
Yeah.
But yeah, so Blood Oath 4,
Yeah, I really did
is
enjoy that.
by
And
far the best one
Yeah.
I've had.
this weekend, or of the Pack
Just
series.
of the
yeah,
of the Blood Oaths, is by far the best.
I'm on board.
I did love that Elijah Craig. That was delicious. I've thoroughly enjoyed that. I want to say last night at Milkwood, I had the Four Roses small batch, and that was a bourbon that I drank all the time when I first got into bourbon, like, many years ago. It was sort of my go-to, and I would talk about it all the time. But as you get into bourbon, you start trying other things. You kind of forget about the things that you love that you brought into it. I really enjoyed drinking the Four Roses small batch last night and kind of getting back into that and going like, oh yeah, like this is what got me into bourbon in the first place. So it was great.
Nice.
Yeah, I had some winners and losers.
Dan's throwing honeys out on the table.
I think Mike
Everybody
has a
gets
list
one.
made out already.
I don't know. I have a couple of winners, maybe a loser. My one of my favorites was actually one of the things I brought. Was the Old Charter 1968. We've had a lot of fun with
Tell us
this.
a story about this,
Age-dated,
Mike.
right?
Or 2012.
Yeah, I lucked into a case that was incredibly dusty, and the owner at the retail shop said, "Oh yeah, it's been sitting there since the 70s at least," and it was
age stated at least.
yeah. I mean, you have difficulty always sometimes in understanding the provenance and as well as the vintage elements around a lot of liquor products, but this one is probably a little bit more difficult than some other ones. So I was looking at the bottle and the label, and I was like, and I was listening to the retailer. That was my big mistake. And so I ended up, I bought the whole case. We came back, and several people have enjoyed this, and I brought it with me on the trip. And so we're enjoying it, and Carrie Ann picks up the bottle. She says,
Well, Mike's telling me it maybe is from 1972. It's the year of my birth, so I'm very interested. I would really like to show that this is 1972 so I could convince Mike to give me one of these bottles when I am checking out the bottle. And I'm looking and looking. I'm like, something has to give us a clue here. And lo and behold, on the neck label, bourbonwhiskey.com, it says.
yeah.
And I asked Mike, exactly when was it that Al Gore invented the interweb? I was trying to remember when that happened.
Does that ever happen to you, Pops?
I make no mistakes.
There you go. The other thing I did bring this.
But it's delicious.
It was.
So
it was delicious. So I also brought a private barrel pick from Four Roses, OESK, and is a private barrel pick picked by a social whiskey club that I help organize in Nashville called the Whiskey House. And it's the first time we had done something on our own. And it's a group of extraordinary folks, really great palates. And it was great to share that with Dan, because I know that Dan and a lot of the other people from the Whiskey House were involved through picking that barrel, and it was really great to come back and share that, because I know you go through a ton of barrel picks all the time, but it was cool to sit down.
Not at my house, but down there.
I'm sorry, were you not just the one to say yawn to barrel pick?
I did, yeah, but I like the juice in that. I
Circle
didn't say I
back.
like the process or the impact
That's
on
good
the
old boy
industry.
Mike.
Yeah.
Burned wood.
The one thing I did not like this weekend was the Zinfandel on the Remus cocktail.
Not into that.
I did not particularly enjoy the wine, or just I don't know. It was very distracting. Pops.
All right. Well, I'll start with the worst. I think it goes without saying.
The 45.
The 45-year-old bourbon.
Don't understand it.
He's like,
But-
humble
but-
brag, I tasted it,
But
you
it was
didn't. It was
$1,800.
really bad.
But I have to tell you that I can't appreciate the fact that they've created beachfront property in my mouth. The desert sandiness, dryness is overwhelming.
If I had a dime for every time I said that.
Exactly. Far as the best, I was actually surprised when we were at Michter's and they were carding us through. They let us actually dump a barrel and scoop out from that.
Oh, I love that aroma, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. And now the whiskey that we drank from the barrel was phase 2. So this was their recipes contract distilled. So they didn't make it. They're replicating that in theory now. So we'll wait and see what comes out. And it was astounding. It was so good. I mean, obviously, anytime it comes right out of the barrel, it's good. But we tried it again out of a bottle, and it was equally as good. So I was fairly impressed with that, as well as the barrel strength rye that they're putting out.
Okay, we're running out of time, but I got a few here. Easy. Bill helped me recalibrate my low end of my scale, Winchester, without a doubt.
The shot heard around the world.
I tasted that last night, and I said, wow, now that is not a good whiskey. I'm going to do one that I want them to recreate, or if there's bottles still out there, to send me a bottle. Heaven Hill Select Stock, the 8-year-old weeded bourbon, finished in cognac cask. Please
Did
make
we-
more.
Did we talk that up enough?
Please.
We may have tasted that in my house.
Oh, well, after we talked it up. Oh, well.
We tasted it before that, actually. Need to send some of that or make more of that. For two that you can get, I would say the Elijah Craig C917 barrel proof is amazing. I really like the Rebel Yell 10-year-old single barrel. I thought that was fantastic. And being the Scotch guy, I've only had 2 or 3 Scotches this week being in Louisville, but I would say for
They have Scotch here?
no, but Bill had some in his house.
Oh.
If you're looking at a low-cost sherried whiskey, Glengoyne 10-year-old, go out and chase it.
I can't really argue with what
Unpeated.
anyone said tonight. We had a 13-year Willet pick, and then Mike actually brought 2 of my more favorite whiskeys that I had this week, and he brought the Four Roses pick, and he also brought the 14-year Willet. Both of those were in probably my top 5 or 6 of the weekend. We had a blend straight from the barrel that I really enjoyed, but it was mine. And I think everyone meant to say that was their favorite, but they kind of forgot. But yeah, the 13-year Willet that was at the Wednesday night tasting at my house that no one here brought was
My
probably
favorite
the favorite
Willet
thing.
is the one we got this morning.
Right.
It
Yeah.
was I heard it was very light on the palate.
Yeah.
It was pretty light.
Yes.
It's called ether.
They just turned the lights out on
That
us.
means-
I
Wow,
think
there
they're
you
saying
go.
that this
Yeah.
is the end.
Yeah.
Closing
So-
time.
So I want to thank everyone for joining us. This has been a great weekend. I want to thank Dan for everything you've done for us this weekend and before this weekend. And I want to thank Mike for all of this. If you're not here, so no one can see actually all of the technical work that has gone into setting this up. It's not easy.
Yeah.
It's taken a lot of time, and he held a lot of equipment here. So thanks, Mike, again.
You guys are welcome.
Fantastic.
And
Thank-
thanks to Bourbon Classic for hosting us.
Thanks to the Bourbon Classic and
much so.
Michelle from
FSA.
FSA.
It's a great event. You should come.
Yeah, and everyone should make this one of your destination bourbon events of the year. But thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Cheers, and have a great 2018.
Cheers.
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 Cheers.